What's up everybody, this is Master Ian Gamer. The mid-season patch for Overwatch 2 Season 11 has seen the biggest teaser yet for Overwatch 2's next upcoming new hero, and with evidence that a playtest for said hero is imminently on the horizon, today I wanted to do a video putting together all the information we actually have on this next upcoming new hero, who thus far has been codenamed Space Ranger. At this point, we do know quite a bit about her, from her in-game role and even some of her potential abilities, to how she ties into the lore and other existing characters, with even a few minor leaks and additional speculation that can give us a pretty clear image of who and what exactly Space Ranger is going to be. So on that note, let's dive right on in, starting first and foremost with the very first mention of Space Ranger way back at BlizzCon 2023. At this BlizzCon, Blizzard showed off a number of new heroes actually, from Malga to Venture, and even a very little teaser for the next upcoming tank hero who's expected to launch in Season 14. But of course, for this video here today, the most important thing to focus on is the Season 12 support hero, Space Ranger. During the brief segment of the BlizzCon Overwatch What's Next panel where they actually talked about Space Ranger, here is all the information that was disclosed about her. She is a support hero who will be releasing in Season 12, and that Space Ranger is her working code name internally, and thus isn't likely to be her actual name upon release. In terms of her place within the world of Overwatch, she's from the Mars colony, which was an interesting thing to say considering at the time we didn't even know there was a Mars colony within the Overwatch universe. And additionally, they mentioned that Space Ranger would be highly mobile with lots of vertical mobility. The other thing of note is that in the concept images they actually showed of her here, they mentioned that the weapon, being this SMG here, was no longer actually the weapon she had in development at that point in time. Considering that BlizzCon 2023 was well over 6 months ahead of the actual release of Space Ranger, they admitted that much of her design and kit was still actively in development, and thus nothing we see here should necessarily be set in stone as what we actually get with the final hero upon her release. Then, following BlizzCon 2023, things went fairly quiet when it came to Space Ranger up until just recently, where at the start of Season 11, we got what appeared to be in-game teasers referencing this new hero. I did a full video breaking it down at the time, but in short, with the launch of Overwatch 2 Season 11, a blue comet or meteor or some sort of celestial object appeared in the skies above the maps Route 66, Hollywood, and Blizzard World, all three of which are maps that just so coincidentally happen to be roughly located in the American Southwest. Considering what we already knew about Space Ranger at that point, with her being from the Mars colony and having a heavy space theme to her, myself and many others speculated that this object perhaps was indeed Space Ranger returning to Earth from the Mars colony. Well, this speculation turned out to be true with the launch of the Season 11 mid-season patch just recently, where the object previously seen in the sky ended up crashing down on the Dorado attacker's spawn room and turned out to in fact be a personal space pod. The pod itself bears a modified Liu Chang Interstellar logo, Liu Chang Interstellar of course being the spacefaring company within the Overwatch universe that runs a space station as well as previously ran the Horizon Lunar Colony before the Ape Uprising, although the logo we see for the company here on this pod and its parachutes appears to be a modified version of it, with the text Project Red Promise pretty prominently printed. Now, given that Mars is the red planet, it's safe to say that Project Red Promise is probably Liu Chang Interstellar's Mars colony program, or division, whatever you'd want to officially call it, thus lending plenty of credence to the idea that this pod is in fact related to Space Ranger, who again is from the Mars colony. Now, while there isn't a ton of detail to really break down about the pod itself, there is one notable feature within the pod, which is this photograph seen here. This photo depicts May in a lab coat standing beside an otherwise previously unseen woman. And while on its own it doesn't seem like there's that much to discern from this, there is some greater contextual detail regarding who exactly this person is here in this picture and why she's standing beside May, but I'll be getting to that once I get more into the speculation side of things after I've covered all the official concrete detail we have. Now, one last detail to mention about the pod itself is that when you stand next to it, you can actually hear it emitting a Morse code signal, which when translated reads, "Jay has landed, attempting transmission to RTP, awaiting response." This seems like a pretty standard sort of recovery transmission that you would want to have sent out in order to be properly received wherever you ended up landing. Although the mention of Jay having landed is definitely an important detail, and again, I'll be coming back to that more in the speculation portion of this video. Now, if the conclusion of this space pod and all this doesn't seem exciting enough, we also started getting a curious little message appearing in matches whenever one loads in, which is this purple message here. Now, for those of you who've been playing Overwatch for at least the past half a year or so, you'll probably actually recognize this message, as it's a message which historically has appeared leading up to the playtests for both Malga and Venture. The message itself seems to be implying that there is a hero within the game files who currently isn't playable. And in this instance, it is most certainly referring to Space Ranger herself. She is in the game files currently, leading up to a playtest weekend, though unfortunately we don't know quite when that weekend is going to be just yet, though I do have some theories, and again, I'll be touching on that a bit later in this video. Before I get onto that speculation though, it's also worth noting some of the dev comments that have been made surrounding Space Ranger around the same time that we were getting these teasers in-game. Most prominent of this information came from an interview hosted by Spylo with the lead Overwatch game designer Alec Dawson. When asked about Space Ranger and if there's anything that he could share about the hero, Alec Dawson mentioned that she was a high mobility, versatile support who brings some utility that, in the support cast, only one character has at the moment. And that with her in the game's going to be really fast. Now, it seems pretty safe to say that what Alec Dawson is alluding to here is in fact some sort of speed boost ability. This even matches up with what the devs had previously said about Space Ranger back at BlizzCon, which is that she would have high mobility, although it is sort of curious that here he specifically mentions this utility as only existing on one existing support hero, as technically both Kiriko and Lucio are able to give out speed boosts, though granted Kiriko's is only via her ultimate, so perhaps the mentality was that Space Ranger will offer a standard base ability speed boost, much like Lucio, and that it won't necessarily be tied to an ultimate. Again, this was a response to an interview question, so I wouldn't rule out the possibility of there being a slight mismatching of his terminology here, such that there's a bit of confusion. Needless to say, the overall important detail here is that it is very likely Alec Dawson was hinting at Space Ranger having some sort of speed boost mechanic, which, curiously enough, may actually tie back to a bug we saw back in Season 10, where within the in-game text chat, D.Va could occasionally produce this response: "My speed ring is here." Now, at the time, people didn't really know what to make of this. They thought it might perhaps be tying to some new upcoming game mode of some kind. But in retrospect, the mentioning of a speed ring being here, especially with the way this ping is produced, similar to how heroes with other buildable objects, such as Illari with her pylon or Torbjorn with his turret, are able to ping those said buildable objects, it seems like this might have been an accidental inclusion of a ping for a speed ring object. Again, this is delving a bit more into speculation, so I won't talk too much on it right here at the moment, but with the mention of Space Ranger being a speed-focused character, it does seem that there is a strong chance that whatever this bug was back in Season 10 may have been an accidental inclusion as they were testing out Space Ranger internally. Now, there's not much more we can really say on this here without delving into speculation, but it does seem safe to say at the least that this at least could have accidentally been a feature of them playtesting Space Ranger that somehow ended up making it into the live game. Okay, having covered all the concrete official information we have at this point, let's delve a bit into speculation. I will also note there will be some leaks I cover a bit later in this video toward the end of the speculation portion. I'm going to be saving those toward the end because I understand a lot of people don't necessarily want to have things about the character spoiled that haven't been officially stated outright yet, so stay tuned for those, and if you don't want to hear them, then I'll let you know once we get to the leak portion, so you can go ahead and skip that chunk so none of that's spoiled for you. But anyways, anyways, getting onto the broader non-leak speculation, there's actually quite a bit we can discern about Space Ranger as a hero based off of the most recent in-game teaser, which is of course the space pod that crashed down. And let's start first and foremost with that photograph of May. Now, upon discovering this photograph of May and another unspecified woman, many people immediately jumped on an existing in-game voice line May has, which only plays while on the Lijiang Tower map, which is this one.
My friend Jai works here. She and I had a lot of fun in grad school. Maybe too much.
Now, Jai is a character who we otherwise have never seen or heard of before, but apparently she works for Lijiang Interstellar, seeing as Lijiang Tower is the headquarters of the Lijiang Interstellar company. And considering what we see in this image here, it strongly stands to reason that Jai may in fact be the woman depicted. This is further supported by the pod's Morse code message, which again reads, "J has landed." J, of course, is the first letter of Jai's name, thus suggesting that Jai is the person who's returned to Earth and may in fact be Space Ranger. Or at least, perhaps that's what Blizzard wants us to believe at this point. For those of you who've been following Overwatch for as long as I have, you know that Blizzard more often than not will end up throwing in misdirects and red herrings when it comes to building up to a new hero release. Very rarely do they ever just outright show us the name or face or abilities of a new hero prior to them being properly fully revealed. And while Space Ranger is a bit of an exception in this regard, given just how much they showed off about her back at BlizzCon 2023, I still don't think that it's necessarily the case that we're literally looking at Space Ranger herself in this image. And there's more reasons for that than just Blizzard's track record. For starters, considering that May and Jai went to grad school together, Jai herself would at this point presumably be somewhere in her early 40s, which granted doesn't automatically exclude her from being a playable hero. We have plenty of older playable heroes in Overwatch. But when looking at the official concept artwork of Space Ranger, I can't be the only one who doesn't think this looks like a woman in her 40s. She looks fairly young here, someone I would expect to probably be in their early 20s, and sure, maybe you could argue that there's a factor with some sort of like de-aging or age-slowing process involved, seeing as literally May herself underwent a similar thing in that she was in cryostasis for several years. So maybe with all the space travel between Earth and Mars, Jai ended up going through a similar sort of process, and thus she hasn't actually aged that much, except that in this photograph, she already looks older than Space Ranger looks in the concept artwork. And this is a photo from presumably before she engaged with whatever space travel stuff. I mean, even just comparing the two side by side, Jai on the left looks significantly older, although she does share a number of distinct similarities with the concept artwork of Space Ranger. For one thing, the eyes are practically identical between these two characters, and they also both have a distinct little crescent-shaped hair thing on their forehead. Though, speaking of the hair, that's another aspect of these characters which are very noticeably different. Jai has long dark hair with the little crescent shape that's sort of hanging down, whereas Space Ranger has what looks to be short purplish hair. And sure, Jai could maybe have just gotten a haircut and dyed her hair, but I think overall it's safe to say that the Space Ranger concept we see here is depicting someone far younger than the Jai we see in this photograph here. Which is why Space Ranger, seen on the right, is more than likely going to end up being Jai's daughter. I mean, if you think about it, timeline-wise, that would make sense. If Jai is in her 40s somewhere approximately, then it could make sense for her to have a daughter who's in her early 20s. Considering the degree of Jai's involvement with Lijiang Interstellar's Mars program, Space Ranger herself may well have even been born on Mars, and is where she's been living up until this point, while Jai herself perhaps regularly commutes back and forth between the two planets. Going back to the May voice line, the way she mentions that Jai works here while on Lijiang Tower more so implies that Jai works in Lijiang Tower as opposed to merely for Lijiang Interstellar. And Lijiang Tower, if you didn't realize, is on Earth, not Mars. So it could be the case that given Jai-Yi's position within Lucheng Interstellar, she regularly goes back and forth between Earth and Mars, but if she has a daughter, aka Space Ranger, who was born on Mars, well, perhaps until just recently, Space Ranger herself has prominently stayed on the red planet. After all, Mars has a third the gravity of Earth, which means transitioning from living a life on Mars to living a life on Earth wouldn't be very easy or comfortable, so perhaps that was a justification for why she should stay exclusively on Mars, if that was indeed the planet she was born on. Presumably, it would take a pretty dire situation for her to ever want to actually leave Mars and go somewhere like Earth, which, for all we know, could be exactly the situation we're looking at here. It's not uncommon for new Overwatch heroes to have some sort of drastic event leading to them becoming a playable hero on the roster. And in the case of Space Ranger, it could be some sort of trouble with the Mars colony, or maybe even something pertaining to Jai-Yi specifically that has now prompted Space Ranger to leave the colony and come back to Earth. Making such a transition would certainly be very physically taxing on Space Ranger given the change in gravity, which is more than likely why she's wearing the spacesuit we see here. While this might very well just be a standard astronaut-esque zero atmosphere suit, it might also very well give her body crucial support while on a planet like Earth that has 3 times the gravity of Mars. It's less so her wanting to boast this cool space age aesthetic, and more so she'd probably die without it. Now again, as for what exactly has caused her to leave Mars and come back to Earth, whether it has something to do with her mother, an issue with the colony itself, or perhaps just her own decision to want to live somewhere else, we have to wait and see. We don't know just yet. That's probably something that's going to get explored with her origin story or character background once she is actually released as a hero. But I hear you naysayers say, if in fact Space Ranger isn't Jai-Yi and is in fact this other character, presumably Jai-Yi's daughter, then why does it say Jay has landed in the pod's Morse code message? Wouldn't Jay be referring to her mother specifically, as opposed to Space Ranger herself? Yes, potentially, and this is where we're gonna get into some of the leaked details. So again, if you don't want to hear any of the leaked stuff, go ahead and jump to the timecode I have printed here on screen. You've been warned, you've had your time. All right, getting into the leaks. So, the same day that the Overwatch 2 Season 11 mid-season patch went up, this post was made on the Overwatch subreddit by the now renowned Reddit user CF2 Leader. For context, CF2 Leader has established themselves as being a reliable Overwatch 2 data miner and leaker, as they'd previously leaked the return of Pink Mercy as well as several Season 11 skins prior to the launch of Season 11, thus securing their credibility as someone who's able to get information and disclose it, I guess you could say. Well, with the launch of the mid-season patch, this person once again took to Reddit, this time revealing leaked information from the patch itself pertaining to Space Ranger, or should I call her by her actual name, Juno. Now, CF2 Leader doesn't really delve into how they came to know that Juno was going to be her name. Presumably, the name Juno exists somewhere within the game files, and thus they were able to extract that and discern that that's going to be her actual in-game name, meaning that when you see her on the Hero Select roster, it won't read Space Ranger the way a hero like Junker Queen reads Junker Queen. No, her name is going to be Juno. That's probably her birth given name as well as her hero name, Juno, which, much like Jai-Yi, starts with a J, and thus works with what we're hearing in the Morse code message coming from the pod. Now, additionally, there were a few other bits of information regarding Juno that were leaked here in this post, specifically being her default voice line, which is evidently seize the soul, which is a space way of saying seize the day, I suppose. Not the most creative or interesting default line for a character, but then again, default lines usually aren't that interesting or creative. But additionally, there were new in-game ping lines data mined, the most notable of which is my hyper ring is here. This, of course, brings us back to that leaked Diva ping where she said her speed ring is here, although now, instead of a speed ring, it seems to be called a hyper ring. And seeing that it's returning in the same patch that we're going to be getting the Space Ranger playtest, yeah, I think it's more than safe to say that this does indeed tie to Space Ranger. Anyways, having wrapped up the leaks now, let's discuss the final thing we have to talk about here regarding Space Ranger and her imminent arrival, which is her playtest weekend. Yes, the past two new Overwatch heroes, being Mauga and Venture, both got their own playtest weekends leading up to their actual release into the game as a full-on proper hero. And as I mentioned previously, with the strange little purple message popping up when you load into a match, yeah, the fact that this is here once again is a dead giveaway that Space Ranger is not only within the game files, but is going to be having a playtest weekend coming up sometime fairly soon. Now, we don't know exactly when this playtest weekend is going to be. It could realistically be any time between now and the end of Season 11, but shifting again a bit into speculation, my theory is that it's going to in fact be sooner rather than later. You see, another curious detail about the Season 11 mid-season patch is that it came remarkably early, being only roughly 3 weeks into the season as opposed to the usual 4 or 5. And thus far, Blizzard hasn't really given any reason as for why the mid-season patch has come this early this season specifically, but it is worth noting that this mid-season patch brought with it the files necessary for them to run the Space Ranger playtest. So I certainly don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that we end up seeing the Space Ranger playtest itself happening sometime pretty soon. I'm gonna be honest, folks, I wouldn't be surprised if we get the announcement for the Space Ranger playtest being this weekend, only a few hours after I post this video, because for one thing, that just always seems to happen with these types of videos I do, but also because everything's already there. All the files are presumably in the game for her to be a playable hero for a weekend, and it really just comes down to Blizzard deciding when they want to flip the switch to let us actually see and play her. Yes, this does seem very early in Season 11 for them to be running a playtest for a Season 12 hero, but everything seems set up for it to be an imminent playtest. I could be wrong. It might not end up being until the end of July that we actually get to try her out for ourselves, but I have a hunch that we're going to be playing her a lot sooner than we might otherwise expect. That's just my thoughts on it though, and on that note, that does it for everything we know so far about the upcoming new hero Space Ranger. Definitely let me know your thoughts on this new hero in the comments down below. Do you think we're on track with the idea of Space Ranger being Jai's daughter? What do you think about her potential abilities and the speed boost mechanic being a part of her kit? I'd love to hear your thoughts on all this in the comments down below, and as always, be sure to subscribe, hit up that bell icon, follow me on X, and join my Discord server to hang out and never miss any of my future Overwatch 2 news streams and other content. Special thanks to my YouTube channel members who help make these videos possible, and if you'd like to join them to earn some cool rewards, then just hit that join button down below. Otherwise, this is Master Ian Gamer signing off, and until next time, have a great day.